Styled by Giugiaro and considered a cousin of the Soviet Lada, it was born in the 1970s, survived the fall of the Eastern Bloc, and lived on into the 21st century. It wore everything from a basic 1.3-liter pushrod engine to a Ferrari-derived V6. Produced in over 1 million units, it was even sold as far away as New Zealand. All of this describes the FSO Polonez, arguably the most iconic car in Polish automotive history. Never heard of it? All the more reason to dive into its story, one that plays out like a multi-episode family saga, with a promising start and a tear-jerking ending. Before we begin, just a quick note. The voiceover in this video is AI-generated since I don't speak English myself. However, everything else, the ideas, script, research, editing, is done entirely by me. If you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to support it with a like, a comment, and a subscription. It really helps the channel. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, there's a sponsor button right below the video. Now, let's get started. Despite all their advantages, rear-wheel drive Fiats had one significant drawback. By the early 1970s, their appearance had already begun to look outdated compared to the latest developments in global automotive design. Even Fiat itself had switched to newer models by 1974 and discontinued production of the various 1, 2, 4-based cars, while in the USSR and Poland, rebranded and slightly modified versions of the old Fiats were still being produced. In the Soviet Union, Lada models were modernized in-house, without the involvement of outside specialists. But Poland took a different route. Instead of attempting to modernize the aging Fiat 125P on their own, FSO management turned directly to Fiat's Italian engineers with a request to design an entirely new body for the car. The core idea was to create a car that looked modern and aligned with Western European styling trends, while still making full use of the existing Fiat 125P platform, including its rear-wheel drive layout, engines, and suspension. This approach allowed the Polish manufacturer to update its model lineup while keeping costs low, avoiding expensive retooling and retraining at the factory. The design of Poland's new hatchback was entrusted to none other than Italdesign, the legendary coach-building firm led by a still young but already ambitious Giorgetto Giugiaro. The car's styling followed the then-trendy folded paper design language: flat surfaces, sharp lines, steep glass angles, and minimal curves. It may not have looked flashy, but in the context of the mid-1970s, the Polonez came across as fresh, modern, and very much in step with European design trends. At a glance, the Polonez bore a resemblance to the early prototype of the 1974 Volkswagen Scirocco. In terms of layout and proportions, it also echoed other popular European cars of the era, such as the Renault 20, Simca 1307, Volkswagen Passat B1, and the second-generation Audi 100 Avant. But make no mistake, this wasn't a copy of anything. The Polonez was a fully independent design, conceived within the aesthetic norms of its time. There's even a theory that Italdesign gave the Poles an early rejected proposal for what would later become the Lancia Delta, although there's no solid proof of that. Still, the Italian styling DNA was hard to miss, even for the untrained eye. Choosing a hatchback layout wasn't accidental either. By the mid-70s, 5-door hatchbacks were considered the future, combining the practicality of a station wagon, the sleekness of a liftback, and aerodynamic advantages that sedans struggled to match. And indeed, despite its boxy, almost vertical front end and angular body lines, the Polonez achieved surprisingly good aerodynamics. Thanks to flush surfaces and careful detailing, its drag coefficient, CD, was around 0.35. Impressive for its time. That made it more streamlined, not only than the Fiat-derived Ladas, but even than the Soviet-made Samara, which wouldn't debut until nearly a decade later. In many Eastern Bloc countries, car names were often chosen through public contests, and the Polonez was no exception. In Poland, a national naming competition was held, and the winning name was Polonez. inspired by one of the country's most iconic traditional dances, the Polonaise. The name sounded proud, distinctly Polish, and added a sense of national identity to the project. But the new car wasn't just about fresh styling. It was also designed to be more comfortable and, most importantly, safer than its predecessor. Comfort came from an extended wheelbase of 2,509 millimeters, along with smart interior packaging that made the cabin noticeably roomier and more user-friendly than the outdated Fiat 125P. Where the Polonaise truly stood out, though, was in the area of safety. And this wasn't just marketing talk. Thanks to its well-thought-out body structure, the Polonaise was one of the safest cars in Europe at the time, especially when compared to its socialist peers, like the East German Wartburg, rear-engined Skodas, or the Soviet-made Lada. Polish engineers had integrated crumple zones and programmed deformation structures directly into the design. These safety features were advanced enough to meet even North American crash standards, which were among the strictest in the world. From day one, the Polonaise was developed with export markets in mind. That's why it came equipped with durable plastic bumpers that could absorb low-speed impacts without damage, a big leap from the thin metal bumpers common in the Eastern Bloc. It also featured protective side moldings along the fenders and doors, a kind of safety belt for the bodywork, helping to reduce minor dents and scrapes in urban traffic. Several technical details also hinted at the Polonaise's higher ambitions. For example, even in standard versions, it came equipped with disc brakes on all four wheels, inertia seatbelts for front passengers, and factory-installed fog lights, complementing its powerful quad headlamp setup, a rather impressive package by the standards of the 1970s. Inside the cabin, there were more signs of a move-up market: a tilt-adjustable steering column, tachometer, quartz clock, and heated rear window with a wiper added a sense of sophistication that rivaled many Western cars of that era. Compared to the older Fiat 125P, the Polonaise was certainly better equipped and aimed at a more discerning buyer. Originally, the plan was to fit the new hatchback with larger and more powerful engines in the 1.6 to 2.0 liter range. But in reality, the Polonaise ended up with revised versions of the old Fiat 125P engines, either 1.3 or 1.5 liters, producing 60 and 82 horsepower, respectively. While sufficient for relaxed driving, the added weight of the new body, a curb weight of 1,140 kilograms, made the car feel less lively than the lighter Fiats it was based on. One technical update worth noting was the change in timing gear design. The camshaft remained in the engine block, just like in the Fiat 125P, but instead of being driven by a chain, it now used a toothed belt, a more modern solution, though one that required regular maintenance. To slightly boost performance and compensate for the extra weight, engineers tweaked the gear ratios in the transmission. The gearbox remained a 4-speed, but the adjustments helped improve acceleration in the lower rev range. Still, no one would describe the Polonaise as a fast car, especially not by Western standards. The Polish hatchback also had a surprisingly serious motorsport history. It all started with a stroke of luck, or maybe fate. One of Poland's top rally drivers at the time, Andrzej Jaroszewicz, crashed his Lancia Stratos during a race. The car was a write-off, but its heart survived, a 260 horsepower Ferrari Fiat 6 engine. Engineers at FSO saw an opportunity and decided to transplant the powerful Italian motor into their own creation. This led to the birth of the Polonez 2500 Racing, a full-blown rally car that suddenly had enough power to compete with the likes of the Renault 5 Turbo and even the Porsche 911. And incredibly, in one of its very first races, the Polonez managed to claim victory, making headlines and turning heads across Europe. The rally success gave the Polonez a serious image boost. People began to recognize it not just as a socialist hatchback, but as a contender. That recognition translated into export potential, and not just within the Eastern Bloc. For example, tens of thousands of units were sold in the United Kingdom, which became the Polonez's second largest export market after China. The car was also officially exported to West Germany, Finland, Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, and Greece, as well as to several Latin American countries, including Colombia, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. And FSO didn't stop there. They later introduced the Polonez 2000 Rally, powered by a 2.0-liter Fiat DOHC engine, tuned with individual Weber carburetors for each cylinder. This setup pushed the output to around 170 horsepower, a very respectable figure for that era. In 1979, the Polonez 2000 Rally made its debut at none other than the Monte Carlo Rally, one of the most prestigious motorsport events in the world. However, in everyday life, or as they say, on the civilian side, things weren't going so smoothly for the Polonez in its home market. Poland in the 1980s was going through political and economic turmoil, and the car industry felt the effects too. A new budget trim was introduced, which stripped away much of the extra equipment that once made the Polonez stand out among its peers. This stripped-down version was easy to spot. It had rectangular headlights instead of the signature four-round ones. It wasn't just a styling change. It was a visual sign of cost-cutting measures taking priority over quality. In 1986, the Polonez received what we would now call a facelift. It got a new front grille, and small quarter windows were added to the rear fenders to improve rearward visibility. By that time, the Polonez range had grown to include several versions, varying by both trim level and engines. The top-of-the-line SLE Prima model, for example, had larger pistons, increased from 77 to 80 millimeters, which bumped the engine displacement up to 1,598 cubic centimeters. Visually, this version stood out with a factory aerodynamic body kit, giving it a sportier, more upscale appearance. By the car's 10th anniversary, another update was rolled out, this time focused on the rear. The trunk lid was extended, and the loading sill was lowered to bumper level. This not only gave the car a more modern look, but also made loading heavy items much easier. Throughout the 1980s, the Polonez was still a dream car for many Polish drivers. But by the early 1990s, interest began to fade. Expectations were rising, competition was growing, and the Polonez was starting to show its age. That's why starting in 1989, FSO introduced yearly updates, small tweaks to keep the model relevant, new dashboard layouts, better materials, improved structural elements, all part of an ongoing effort to keep the Polonez competitive without launching a completely new car. In 1991, the small displacement versions of the Polonez were finally dropped. Engines with 1.3 to 1.5 liters of displacement were clearly underpowered for the weight and size of the Polish hatchback. Let's be honest, no matter how much locals wanted to support their homegrown car, those tiny engines just didn't cut it anymore. Much more interesting power plants began to appear under the hood. Polonez models started using a 2-liter Ford engine producing over 100 horsepower. With this engine, the car finally came to life. It could accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in just over 10 seconds, which was quite respectable for the early 1990s. That same year, 1991, brought one of the most noticeable visual changes in the model's entire history. The Polonez got a new face. The front fenders and headlights now extended all the way down to the bumper, eliminating the plastic filler panel that previously split the front end. This simple design tweak made the car look years younger. The facelifted version was named Polonez Caro, and it really did look far more modern than its predecessors. Around this time, an alternative to the 1.6-liter petrol engine also appeared, a 69 horsepower diesel unit from PSA. While not exactly a powerhouse, it delivered great fuel economy, making it a popular choice for cab drivers and budget-conscious buyers. Then, In 1996, the Polonez changed again, and this time, it was a big one. For the first time in its history, the car gained a new body style, a four-door sedan based on the Caro model, known as the Polonez A2. A year later, in 1997, both versions, the hatchback and the sedan, received another exterior update, and the new suffix plus was added to their names. By the late 1990s, it became obvious. The Polonez was hopelessly outdated. With roots tracing back to the 1960s, the platform could no longer compete, neither in design nor in technology. But that wasn't the end of its story. In 1999, Poland's FSO factory lost its independence and was acquired by South Korean automaker Daewoo. Interestingly, the Koreans didn't shut the model down. Quite the opposite. They tried to give it a second wind. Just a few months after the acquisition, production of the Daewoo FSO Polonez Combi began in Warsaw, equipped with a 1.6-liter GSI engine. The car received a lightly revised exterior, slightly improved ergonomics, and some more modern features, though its underpinnings remained largely unchanged. In fact, the collaboration with Daewoo started even earlier. By the early 90s, the Polonez had evolved into a full-fledged vehicle family. In 1992, FSO introduced a light commercial version, the Polonez truck, capable of hauling up to 1 ton. Even before that, a station wagon variant had been developed based on the hatchback, featuring a fiberglass rear roof section. These models found widespread use in Poland as utility and fleet vehicles. By the end of the decade, not even Daewoo's engineering could hide the fact that the Polonez was obsolete. Demand dropped sharply, both in foreign markets and domestically. Then came another blow. In 2000, Daewoo declared bankruptcy. Soon after, the FSO plant came under the control of General Motors, and the fate of the Polonez was sealed. In 2002, before Poland had even joined the European Union, production of the long-lived hatchback came to an end. The last Polonez rolled off the line, and the factory fully switched over to producing licensed foreign models. So ended an era, a car born from collaboration with Fiat, modernized with help from Italdesign, and kept alive through decades of effort. Now firmly part of Polish automotive history.